This is a recording of Hamilton Cheifetz. He is a longtime Subud member, amazing musician, and professor emeritus or emeritus. I'm not sure how to pronounce
Emeritus.
it. Emeritus. Oh, there we go. At Portland State University. So Hamilton, the first question I'm going to ask is, how did you find or come into Subud?
Well, first I want to say it's great to see you. I always love talking to you and love seeing you, even if it's on the screen. A little background about my family before I lead into the story how I came to Subud. My grandparents were all from Western Russia or Ukraine or Lithuania, however you want to call it. And they all became quite politically active in the United States back in the 30s, I would say, and after that. My father's father was brought up in a very religious family. His father was a Hasidic Jew, and he took a ship. He stowed away on a ship and ended up in Argentina when he was about 18 years old. He didn't want to get drafted in the Russian army, and he got out of there. And he got work as a kosher ritual slaughterer in Argentina. So he would slaughter chickens and cattle and pray over them first and go through the ritual. And he used to tell us the story when we were little kids that he had a box that had his knives in there. And one day he took his box of knives and he went to work, and he said, there was a big steer, and the steer had big brown eyes. And the steer looked at me, and I looked at the steer, and I said, nope, if this is God's law that I'm supposed to kill this animal, then I renounce all of that. And he said that he broke his knives over his knee, and he renounced his religious orientation, and he became an atheist. And he was very actively teaching Jewish history and politically active. But he raised my father to be an atheist and a scientist person. My father raised my brother and sister and me also to be atheists and to look with suspicion or derision on religious ideas and people even. And the idea was to be aware of fairness and justice and compassion, but rational beings and nothing to do with anything religious at all. Then my brother and sister both came to Subud, and they were in Subud for, I'd say 3 or 4 years before I came to Subud. My sister never really talked to me about Subud. My brother, once he talked to me about Subud. We were painting our grandmother's apartment. He told me about the Ladihan. And my only frame of reference was what I said in response, which was, that reminds me of something I feel when I listen to music, or if I play music. And that's as far as that went. my brother was wise and still is wise, and so he didn't press the point. Some weeks later, he took me to see the Sky Mounters in Chicago with Hamid Camp and Lewis Ross. Oh, and he didn't say anything. He just said, you know, you might enjoy these guys. And so we left after they played their set. And my brother said, so what did you think of Sky Mounters? And I said, boy, I don't know. They seem like really happy or something. I don't quite know what to say about them, you know, but they seem really happy. And my brother just kind of laughed, and that was it. That's all we talked about. Not long after that, my brother had his first child, Gabriel. And my brother decided to have a bris, a circumcision ceremony, in his apartment when Gabe was 8 days old, as is the tradition. Well, it was in the summer, it was in July. I was 25. I was in a really dark place. I was abusing substances and kind of frightened about the direction my life was going. And I didn't feel like going to this bris. But it was my brother's first child, so, you know, I felt obligated to go. So I went. And instead of just having the mohel come in and do the ceremony, he had 8 Subud guys form like a minyan or a quorum, which is traditional to kind of validate the ceremony. But he had arranged with the mohel in advance that once everybody was in place, that these 8 guys should be given like a minute to get quiet. So that's what happened. They all closed their eyes. My father wouldn't come into the room. I still remember seeing him outside the room, like sort of pacing back and forth. He didn't understand why my brother wanted to have such a ceremony. And next to me was my father's mother, Miriam, and next to her was my sister. And these guys are standing there with their eyes closed. After a little while, my grandmother said, "What are we waiting for?" You know, she was impatient. And I said, "I don't know." You know, I just pointed to these guys who were standing there with their eyes closed. Then I kind of felt like the energy in the room changed. But I didn't pay any attention to it because, you know, I was half out of my mind half of the time anyway. So the energy kept changing all the time. And I didn't really pay attention to that. But I noticed something. And then the bris was over with in a few seconds. I mean, it was fast. And then there was a little celebration in my brother's apartment with sandwiches and, you know, the family to celebrate. Well, I couldn't talk because I kept breaking down and crying. And in spite of the state I was in those days, I was kind of a sociable guy and I like to talk, and I still do. But whenever I started talking to somebody, I would get all choked up and I wouldn't be able to speak. I was like, this is weird, you know, this is really strange. I felt like that for quite some time that day, and I was trying to figure out why. I couldn't really figure out why. I had some notions I came up with, but I couldn't really figure it out. And then the next morning when I woke up, I just felt indescribably happy. And I also felt enveloped by a loving, powerful force. And I was like, whoa, what the heck, you know? But I felt so good. I called my brother. I said, okay, what were you guys doing yesterday? because I'm feeling really happy today or something. So he laughed and he said, well, let's go get a coffee. So that's how I got open. And then I had like, until I started doing Latihan, I had basically almost 3 months. I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I would go as a probationer to talk to the helpers in Chicago, and they tested and and I needed to wait. One of the helpers was Hamid Camp and gave me some very down-to-earth advice. I had a couple of questions, but I basically had no questions. I was in this really blissful state for that entire 2 or 3 months. And of course, my mind fought this and kept doubting what was going on and saying, wait a minute, what about everything you always were taught to believe? And, you're talking about a loving, powerful force. Come on. And then I would feel this laugh just bubble up from my stomach. And it was really powerful. And my mind just was devastated by the strength of this laugh and this good feeling. This happened hundreds and hundreds of times. I mean, I kept asking these questions. Oh yeah, but wait a second here. And then, then I'd have this laugh again, hundreds and hundreds of times, until finally I sort of gave up, or my mind, gave up asking, because the answer was always the same. It was this incredibly strong and good feeling. Then I started doing Latihan, and boy, I mean, that was like difficult, because I didn't move for a couple of years at least. And now it's 47 years later. I mean, I'm so in awe and grateful that I was brought to Subud through this spontaneous experience and given these 2 or 3 months of absolute blissful feelings. Before the Latihan started, before I started really doing the Latihan and finding it, frustrating and kind of confusing or confounding. I know that people are moving, they're singing, and they're doing this and that, and I'm just feeling like a stone, like really stuck. But because of this feeling that I had before I started actually doing the Latihan, I knew that it was the path for me, and so I just kind of stuck it out. Then I went to Seattle. I think it was maybe 78. Bapak was in Seattle. Big, huge room with hundreds of guys. We're doing Latihan little. Bapak stops it, and then he says, now Bapak's going to add something that's going to make it more possible for y'all to sing and dance. And I said, oh, that's a riot, sing and dance. I mean, I can't even move my pinky, nothing is happening. And then, guys started singing like, Frank Sinatra but then I started singing. I started singing this baritone voice that I had absolutely no idea that I had. And I sang a lot. And then I walked back from the hotel where that was, or wherever it was, to where I was staying in Seattle. And I was just floating and feeling like something had sort of been knocked loose. In those days, Papa would walk through the Latihan. He'd walk up close to somebody. I don't know if he did that night, but whatever happened, there was something I really could feel. And then not long after that, I was in Toronto at the end of the World Congress. It was at the end of Ramadan. Bapak was there. And again, I was in a room, this time with several hundred men, and Bapak spoke very quietly about don't feel restrained, just relax. And I had a really strong experience then and wept and just felt like I was like getting unburdened of very deep stuff that had been in me for a very long time. And when I walked out of the room, I sort of was disoriented. I mean, I wasn't quite sure who I was then because it felt like a lot of the angst that I always felt had been removed. So I didn't know, what was left. And so I'm still learning, I guess, but that's how I came to Subud. And as I say, God in his infinite wisdom gave me that gift that I wasn't asking for, that I had no idea was coming. And then this blissful couple of months, which was really vivid and gave me the, well, I guess groundwork or something you could say, to stick it out when I wouldn't move in Larihan for a couple of years. And I just kept going, I kept driving down from Milwaukee to Chicago. Nothing would happen, and I would drive back home. But I mean, maybe something happened, but nothing that I could really notice. I just kept waiting for something to happen week after week. But, I know I'm not the only person that happened to. And somehow people manage to stick it out until you go through whatever you have to go through to experience something that you can feel more.
Yeah. Fantastic story.
I'll tell you a funny little story. My nephew Gabriel, whose bris was that day, well, now he's what, 47? I feel a very special bond with Gabriel naturally. And one day there was a Congress. I'm not sure where it was, but Gabriel was there and I was there, and we were in the lobby of the hotel or something. And I was talking to a couple people, and Gabe was standing there. And I told a little short version of that story about how I came to Subud. And then Gabriel said, yeah, my loss was his gain. That was his summing up of how that worked. So
what did he mean by that?
Well, he lost something in the bris, in the ceremony.
So he was the child.
He was the child. He was the 8-day-old baby, and I got something out of it. So I thought it was, a good example of Gabe's sense of humor, and he lives in Minneapolis now, and I've always felt, as I say, a really special bond with him.
Is he in Subud?
Yes.
Oh.
And his sister Karen is also in Subud, and my sister's 2 sons are also in Subud, and I have 3 sons, and one of them has done Larihan a bunch of times. I have 2 other sons who have not expressed interest, but I try not to talk about it too much, or
Yeah.
we'll see what happens, you know.
So were you doing music back then at that time? How did you get into the music?
My mother was a violinist. She was a wonderful violinist. She could have been a professional violinist, but she had 3 children, and she died when I was 9 years old. She was 37 years old, died of cancer. But I remember her violin playing very, very vividly. I remember sitting on the floor. She would play the violin, and my father would accompany her on the piano. He was a psychologist, but he was a pretty decent amateur pianist, and he would play with her sometimes. And she had a very passionate, warm way of playing, and she loved the cello very, very much. And she and my father surprised me with the cello when I was 7 years old. I already had a few piano lessons and some music classes for little kids. But my mother just loved the cello. So they came back from a vacation to New York. We were living in Chicago, and woke me up in the middle of the night. And my father had a cello behind his back and took it out and said, "Here." I was like, whoa, you know, that's beautiful. And I couldn't wait to get home from school, and I sounded just horrible. And they got me a teacher right away. She was a young woman, French, hardly spoke English, but yeah, music, you don't really need to say a lot necessarily. And so she got me started, and I still remember how I sounded then when I was 7, which was, as I say, really horrible. But I gradually got better, and my parents were very wise, and they didn't like try to force me to practice. I mean, I wanted to practice. I wanted to try to get better. And I still do. I come down every day here to the university, to my office, and I practice every day to learn new pieces or relearn pieces that I'm going to perform, and just to stay in shape, because it takes a certain amount of strength to play the cello. And when I was 15 years old, I auditioned for János Starker, who was one of the greatest cellists of history, very famous cellist with 100 records, and he was a genius and just played better than everybody else. And when I finished playing for him, he said, "If an angel should come down and tell you that you could be anything you want, what would you say?" And I said, "I would say, I want to be like you," which was the honest answer. But he sort of liked that answer. Then I started studying with him just a few months later, and he was an unbelievable teacher, and I'm still trying to apply the things that I learned way back then. He also spoke like 7 languages, and he had some pretty unusual abilities. Like, he would tell a student, you know, after I hear somebody play for me for like 5 minutes, I can tell them where they were 5 years ago and where they're going to be in 5 years and what they're trying to hide. And so we'd go, "Oh, great, you know, thanks for telling us," you know. But it's true, he could kind of look right through you and figure out exactly what you needed to hear, like some other people that we've met maybe. And it was just astounding. And he became like my second father. And because of him, I got a job when I was 24, teaching in a college in Milwaukee and playing in a trio with the violinist that I still play with now, who I played with for 48 years. 3 years later, we moved together to Portland and formed a trio with a different pianist. And she's retired from the university now, but she's still very active teaching violin students brilliantly. And she's an incredible musician and has a great work ethic and studied with Yasha Heifetz, and she's just like an inspiration. And because I studied with Starker and he kind of liked me, and had some respect for me, he wrote recommendation letters that really helped me to get that job in Milwaukee and then the job here in Portland. Without his letters, I never would have gotten those jobs. And he lived to be 88 years old. He died about 5 or 6 years ago, and I stayed in touch with him my entire life. And basically, after I studied with him for 2.5 years, I was having trouble functioning at college. I was getting in trouble and I wasn't going to class. And so I left school and went back to Chicago to kind of regroup and try to figure out, what was the problem. And I started getting work and playing professionally. So it kind of forced me to practice. And so I was 18 then, and I've been a professional cellist since I was 18. And I played basically every day. A couple of years ago, I had some health adventures and I had to go through some radiation treatments and some chemotherapy, and it worked. And I'm feeling good again now. But when those treatments ended, I was not feeling so great. And there was about 7 weeks that I couldn't come down here and play the cello. And that was a very long stretch. I was just feeling unwell and weak. And when I finally had the strength to come back here and try to play, my fingers were soft like a baby's fingers,
Yeah.
And I would play for 5 minutes and they would get all irritated and hurt. And I would say, well, I remember this when I was a little kid, So I just kept coming back and playing for 5 or 10 minutes every day for a few weeks, and they gradually toughened up and I got a little tougher, and now I'm feeling physically good and I have a lot more energy. And I also feel like the illness, as much as it was not, a whole lot of fun, it was some sort of gift. As my treatments began, every day I would do Ladihan. And I would ask, like the first couple of days after I got diagnosed, I felt sad for about 2 days. Then I never felt sad anymore. I never felt sad. I never felt frightened. I just felt like, all right, I've been told this is curable. I'm going to go through treatment. And so I would do Ladihan and I would ask, how should Hamilton's feeling be about this illness he's experiencing? And I would start laughing. And I would feel just great. And I'd go, that's surprising, And then the next day I would ask the same thing and feel the same kind of thing. And day after day, I would ask the same thing. Finally, I said one day, I know I keep asking this every day, but I really want to feel again, like, how should Hamilton's feeling be about this illness? Again, just laughing and a feeling of joy. So I tried to kind of go with that. And I have a wonderful family. I live with my wife, and at that time, two of our sons were in the house, and they gave me a whole lot of support. And I'm very close with my brother and sister. So, we stayed very much in touch during that whole time. And so I feel like I've sort of come out on the other side of that. And, who knows what's going to happen? I sure don't know. But yeah, that's what brought me to this moment.
Yes. So I have a question. Have you felt that being in Subud or doing the Ladihan has had an effect on your music?
Yes, totally. I always had some kind of innate feeling for music or understanding about music, but that became way deeper and more profound after I was open. And then the feeling of nerves and tension approaching a performance. I always loved playing for people. It wasn't anything that really terrified me. From the time I was a little kid, I would drag the cello to school and play my stupid little thing for my class, because I liked the cello, and I liked music, and I liked playing stuff for people and sharing it. But now when I play music, I kind of feel like I'm more in touch with the music itself, and maybe more connected to my heart, and I feel more open and less self-conscious. I was in Los Angeles once. I think it was 1981, and Papa was in Los Angeles. And there was going to be an entertainment evening. And Morris McClellan was the MC. And I was not on the program, but I really wanted to play something. So I said, Morris, is there some way I could, sneak onto this program? He said, well, if you play before the program, as people are coming in, just get up there and play a bunch of Bach or something while people are coming in. Then once everybody's in, you could play the first piece on the program. So I played a bunch of Bach while people are coming in. Then Bappa and his party came in. And I was up on a stage, and Bappa walked in. He kind of looked up at me with this smile, like, oh, you're still there, like you managed to like figure this out or something. And then I played the prelude of the first Bach suite. And I was a little nervous when I started playing. And after about a half a minute, I had this amazing feeling of like tenderness, just a really loving, tender feeling. And I had no more nerves, and I just enjoyed the rest of it. It was kind of a different experience. So I'll always be grateful to my brother Morris for facilitating that, for working that out, and making it possible for me to be up there and experience that. I feel like music has unimaginable power that we still are only beginning to understand. Power to heal the heart, to heal the body, to heal the mind and calm the mind. I mean, I turn to music every day, usually Mozart or Bach. I listen to it in the car. I play all the beautiful music that I'm able to sort of schedule for myself or turn to for myself. So yeah, my connection to all the things that are involved when you're playing music has really deepened and become much more natural and continues to evolve. And I keep working at it, because if there's one thing I've learned over all these years is you have to keep working at it. You can have, some ability, but it doesn't amount to anything unless you really work at it. And the great musicians, maybe they were born with some affinity or some kind of gift, but they worked harder than everybody else. And that's why they became the musicians that they became. They didn't just let it happen and, rest on their laurels or something. And so, that's reality. That's kind of humbling. But, that's one thing that I can feel a little satisfaction in or take some credit for, is the amount of work that I've done and keep doing in terms of whatever ability I have to use my hands and, feel things. I have nothing to do with that. That's all like my good fortune that, and also that I had these loving parents who provided me with this opportunity and education and support, and stuck with me through, some bumps in the road. And so, I mean, that's a big blessing,
Yeah. Do you remember going to a Congress and performing the gaucho piece?
Well, I know the gaucho piece has always been one of your favorite ones, and you used to ask me to play it like years after I had been playing it. And the gaucho piece is a piece written by an Argentinian cellist who also played flamenco guitar. And he employed all these guitar techniques on the cello. And I spent a long time learning that piece from his record, because the piece was not published. I figured out most of the things he was doing. Some of the stuff to this day, I don't know how the heck he was managing to do what he did on the record, but I got close most of the time. And I used to love playing it. And then I kind of stopped working on it. And then I'd see you at a Congress and you'd say, hey, play that gaucho piece. And I would go, oh, I'd love to, but it's not in my fingers. I can't do it anymore. And then like a year or two ago, you posted something from the World Congress in Sydney. I think that was '89. And in Sydney, Sika invited me to play a cello recital at the Opera House in the recital hall. I played with Lavinia Omar, rehearsed stuff with her for cello and piano. And it was a big deal. And Rahayu was there in the front row, and Helena Handel was there at the concert. After the concert, she was singing the little lullaby that I played as an encore, because she would sing it too, a little Spanish lullaby. And I had no memory that the day after that, there was an entertainment evening in the tent where everybody was meeting. And I played that gaucho piece, but you had a video of it somehow, and you posted it. And I watched that thing, I was like, I didn't even realize that I had played that in Sydney. And then I got all fired up to relearn it. And so I spent like weeks and weeks, learning to play it again. And since then, I performed it a few times. And I love playing it. It just, as I say, it demands some really good calluses on your right hand and some techniques that I only use when I play that particular piece. So, but thanks to you, Rahman, I brought it back into my little repertoire, and I'm going to keep playing it. So thanks for posting that thing and reminding me that, oh yeah, this was something that was really fun to play. And also it's a good challenge for me at my advanced age to try to still do it.
So are you willing or able to try doing it right now?
No, I can't. I will play something for you, but I don't know if you can see this, but I have this horrible blood blister on my index finger because somebody just donated hundreds of music books to my music school earlier today. And we loaded them all up, all these boxes, on this big like hand cart that was on 4 wheels. And I reached down to pick it up to get it over the curb so we could get it into the music building. And like an idiot, I put my finger under the bottom of it, and it slipped and squished my finger. So I have this very painful blood blister on the end of this finger. Well, that's the finger I usually play pizzicato with. So I've got an excuse. I will play something else. I would love to play a very short little piece called Song of the Birds, which only uses the bow, so I don't have to deal with this painful thing. And Song of the Birds, it's a very special piece. Growing up, one of my heroes was Pablo Casals, who was born in 1876. He was Catalan, and he was the greatest cellist in the world. And during the Spanish Civil War, he fled Spain and went into a self-imposed exile from Spain and refused to play any solo concerts for the rest of his life. And he lived to be 96 years old. He lived in Puerto Rico. And he spoke at the United Nations a number of times. And he was even though he was just a cello player, he had been so famous, and he was such a sincere and articulate advocate for peace in the world and justice, that people actually paid attention. And he used to love playing this little Catalan folk song, Song of the Birds. That was the only solo piece he would play. He played a little chamber music, you know, trios or something with friends when they would convince him to do that. But he gave up wealth and, you know, glory to protest all these countries, including this country that had relations with Franco and recognized the fascist government in Spain.
Kind of a similar situation to what's going on now, huh?
Tell me about it. I was playing Song of the Birds earlier today to warm up. And it's kind of a really simple, short, and very profound little melody. And it's Catalan, but it sounds like it could be a Ukrainian song or a Jewish song or you name it. I mean, it has like sort of universal illuminations or emanations, I should say. Casal's last performance in public was at the United Nations when he was 96 years old. He played the Song of the Birds with a little string orchestra accompanying him. He sat down without the cello, and you know, somebody brought the cello to him and handed it to him because he was 96 years old, for God's sake. And his form was just steady. No tremor. And he played the piece very slowly and with this amazing expression. And that was the last time he ever played in public. So sometimes I play the piece just as a little homage to him. And also, as I say, I mean, the piece has some power. So I'll play it for you. There.
Beautiful.
Thanks. It's an amazing little piece. So, yeah, it's poetry, you know. I think it says a lot in just a few minutes. And also, you don't have to analyze it. You don't have to analyze it to understand it. In
Yeah.
fact, that's kind of how I feel about music in general. You don't have to have any musical education to feel absolutely everything that is conveyed by a piece of music. I think it's uncanny and magical, and you know, you learn a little bit something about whatever music theory. Maybe it enhances your understanding in a certain way, but it's not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, made me cry.
Good. Good. Well, it's a sad song. So it means I was doing my job. And you know, to create a sound that seems to say something, I often tell my students that one of my pet peeves is hearing a very, very skilled musician who's obviously really, really good and says absolutely nothing, and just using the same sound all the time, and I listen to it, I don't feel a thing. And then there are musicians like Pablo Casals or like Jascha Heifetz, who are my teachers sometimes too. And you listen to them play, and not only are they like super technically proficient, but you feel all kinds of stuff when they play, and it's really storytelling. It's like a wordless way of telling stories and evoking all kinds of feelings, you know. Yeah.
Oh. So do you have any other stories, any experiences with Bapak or other things that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I feel really blessed that I was able to go see him several times. The two stories that I related about Larihan in Seattle and then again in Toronto, I mean, those were like life-changing experiences for me. I also heard him sing toward the end of the World Congress in Toronto. And there's some incredible recordings on the Subud library of talks, you know. Many of which have songs and prayers that he sang. And I turn to those sometimes. In Toronto, his song started, "Never be disappointed or depressed." That was the first part. And then it was like, "You have received the guidance of God," you know, which is a great good fortune for you and your life. So
that was the translation of what he's saying.
Yes. Yes, you know, he would sing and then he would say it in Javanese and then it would get translated into, or he would then translate it into Indonesian, then it would get translated into English. Sometimes I listen to him singing. I've had the experience of feeling like my body is actually experiencing the sound of his singing instead of like my ears, you know, just it going in here. It's like it's going in everywhere for some reason, and yeah, there's a kind of wealth of archived things on the library. So yeah, to have been there at a time that I was again feeling kind of confused. I was in an unhappy relationship, and then he says, you know, never be disappointed or depressed. I'm like, oh great, you know, and but by the end of the song, I mean, it was so incredibly uplifting and healing and inspiring that it made a profound effect on me. And that song, I mean, that song is out there. It didn't just disappear that day. And so I've heard it many times since then, and you know, turned to it on occasion. Yeah.
Something to turn to when you're feeling depressed.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, there are people in my life who have trouble with depression sometimes. People that are very close to me. And sometimes when I'm talking to them, I forget how depressed I used to be, because it's been decades since I was depressed. I mean, I've had some challenges, you know, life is full of ups and downs, and you experience loss and you have grief, but I've never been depressed in decades. But I was depressed for a long time before that. And so I know really from experience how horrible that can be and how difficult it is. Papa used to say, just do what's in front of you. It's like, wow, what a concept, you know? You don't have to like think too much about like, okay, and then after I do this, then what if this and that? You don't have to think about any of that. There's just like this thing you have to do. So just do that. And then there's something else. Then you just do that. And you go from one thing to the next. After I was open, I actually started experiencing that. And just actually living in the moment and enjoying each moment for the first time in my like adult life, and not thinking about all this stuff and all this thinking that's like totally useless, like regret, like, oh, if only I hadn't acted like such an idiot and done all these stupid things. Well, it's history. You can't really do anything about it. And then also worrying about the future. Oh, what if this happens or this happens? I really can't do anything about that either. So that's sort of pointless. But when you're depressed, that's kind of all you can think about, and you feel really stuck and paralyzed and like you can't move. When I was a little boy, I remember waking up one night in my bed and there was a monster like on top of me, pressing down on my chest, trying to keep me from breathing. And it was terrifying. And I woke up and like kind of shook it off. I was little. Then I went to the Sydney World Congress. I had this incredible experience and played music, and I felt like I fell in love with 1,000 people. I really felt that. And I would be sitting in the tent and there would be, a couple hundred people in front of me, and I would look at the back of their heads and be able to see how happy they were. It's like from the back of their heads, I can see that they're all happy. This is so interesting. And there are all these, very happy people. And I was flying back on the plane. It was pretty empty plane. And I had like a whole row because it was not a crowded plane. So I lay down on my back. I fell asleep on the plane. Guess what? I woke up, there was a thing on my chest that was like trying to stop me from breathing. And it didn't want me to move, okay? It didn't want me to move and it didn't want me to breathe. So I said, Allah, and, get off of me, whatever you are, and it did. But I was like, whoa, I remember this thing from when I was a little kid, and how funny that it should happen like right now. Then I got back home to Portland. I had a whole series of amazing dreams. In one of the dreams, Bapak turned into a woman. He had long flowing hair. And then he was submerged in a plexiglass tank full of water, and he was under the water, breathing just fine under the water. And he was saying to me, come on in here. It's fine. You're going to be okay. I was like, oh no, I can't breathe under the water. That's impossible. Well, that was an interesting dream. I also had a dream that I flew to Sydney for the World Congress, and I arrived at immigration, and they said, oh, you can't come into Australia because you don't eat enough and you don't talk loudly enough. So get back on the plane and go home. And so I had to. I got back on the plane. I was so upset. So I called my brother, which I frequently did, and I said, I had the craziest dream, They wouldn't let me into Australia. Oh, how come? Well, they said that I didn't eat enough and I didn't talk loudly enough. So my brother says, well, you don't eat enough. And then he said, talking loudly, that means putting yourself into the world. So maybe you need to really put yourself into the world more. I was like, that makes sense. I'll try that, and then I kind of did. Yeah, I had all these amazing dreams for a week or so after I came back from Sydney. sort of taught me something. Yeah.
You remind me of a dream that I had with Bapak, in which I was watching Bapak and Usman sitting at a table in front of a door or a room, and the room was filled with water, like a complete room
Yeah.
full of water. But the water didn't flow out. It was just the room filled with water, but the water stayed in. It didn't flow out anywhere. And people were going past Bapak, going into this room. And I remember him saying that having the right name would help you to come close to your angels.
Wow.
And I don't remember if I'd had my Subud name at that point or not, but that was a dream that I still remember.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful dream. Yeah, I guess 1981 in Vancouver, BC. Papa came there, and Capri Hall in Vancouver, and then I asked for my name, and I got a letter saying the right name for you starts with the letter H. So send us a list of 5 names you like starting with the letter H. Well, guess what? I couldn't think of any that I thought of all the Paul Newman movies, you know, Ombre, Harper, Hud. And then I thought of all these names like Hamid and, you know, but then, and there were English names like Henry and Harvey, Herman. None of those names I like, but I've always liked the name Hamilton. Since I was a kid, the name Hamilton always made me feel good for some reason. I don't know why. So I wasn't following the rules, but I sent back a letter saying, you know, I've really been trying to come up with a list of 5 names I like that start with H, but the only name I like that starts with H is Hamilton. And I got a letter back, the right name for you is Hamilton. So I was like, whoa, what a relief. Maybe it was just a polite response, I don't know, but whenever somebody calls me Hamilton or I see the name, it's a reminder of something really good and a helpful thing, to put it mildly. So yes, I mean, once again, I watched the interview with Yo Kalisher, and he said more than once in that interview that this is just given to us like free of charge, you know. He was like sort of continually amazed by that, as I am. So yeah, summing up, I feel very grateful, and also that my work is the right work for me, and when I play music, I feel like I'm really in tune with what I'm doing, and I'm using my stuff that I have and expressing also things so that's not inside anymore, it gets out, and well, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes people have a response that is some indication to me that I'm on the right track with what I'm doing. So it encourages me to keep at it. So I'm going to keep at it and keep working. And I'm grateful to you, Rahman. Always, I've loved you, and always so happy to see you. And I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that you invited me to share some stories, and and talk about some really important and personal stuff. So now it's out there. And I hope that I get to see you before too long somehow. I don't know what's in the cards here for, but I know that things are supposedly going to the endemic stage now, and my university is removing the mask mandate in like 2 weeks at the end of the term. So, you know, let's hope
Perhaps,
that things keep getting better.
perhaps at the next Manuka meeting.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
I look forward to that.
So Hamilton, the last thing I'm going to ask you is, do you have any reservations about other people seeing this video? Do you mind if I put it on YouTube and everything?
I have no reservations at all. So feel free to share it. Sometimes when I talked about some stuff that's kind of particular to Subud, like Bapak's songs and the Subud library, I realized that this won't really have much meaning for anybody who's not a Subud, but I don't see any reason to put a lid on it or restrict it. So I have no problem with you sharing it, and I would appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rahman. Love to you.
I'm going to turn off the recording now. So
Okay.
hang on just a second.